Good evening again, folks. It's another show, and we're off to Italy in 1943 for a show about the Battle of Ortona. And joining me tonight, she's been on World War II TV a couple of times in various things. Merryn Walters, writer, living in Suffolk. Hi, Merryn. How are you?
Hello, Woody. How are you doing? It's Norfolk.
Norfolk. In my mind, you live in Suffolk because no one will want to live in Norfolk.
It's the bulgy bit on the east coast. That's about as close as we need to be.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, in my mind, you're Suffolk, but okay, you're really Norfolk. But anyway,
I'll tell you
good.
what it is. We're both Ipswich supporters. That's what it is.
That is it. Yeah. And they're playing right now, and probably losing, but we'll see. Anyway, when I was putting a plea out for people to come on this week and talk about stuff, what drew you, before we get into the presentation, to studying this particular battle? I know you've been to Italy a few times. Is that kind of simply it, because you've been there?
I lived there for a couple of years when I was really young and keen to gad about, speak Italian. For me, Ortona is one of those battles that I tripped over 3 or 4 years ago, and it has everything for me. It has a bit of myth about mapping, which is really my bag. There's a stream about media. It's all about perspective. And it's one of those battles that when you hear about it, when you read about it, everybody has most people have if they've heard of Ortona, they've got a preconceived idea of what it's all about. And I just kind of got into it and went, is there more to it than that? And I think there is.
It is. It's interesting that it's got the little Stalingrad, the bloody December. It's one of those ones that seems to have picked up at the time these sort of names, which always suggest to me that there's some myth involved, because the battles that have this sort of legacy where people discuss them with like a tag name can often be problematic, can't they? In that sense,
they become a legend in their own lunch break.
Yeah.
And they get, exactly as you said, they get tagged and people think that's what that's all about. And that just doesn't do them justice, because then we think of them in that vein and don't really go into them any further. And I think this is one that's worth going into. So that's what we're going to try and do tonight anyway.
Indeed. So, as usual, you provided a PowerPoint presentation, lots of graphics, lots of maps. Everybody, we like a nice map. Even got a bit of video towards the end. So, set the scene for us. This is kind of halfway through the Italian campaign, I suppose. But set the scene of what's been happening and where you're going to take us this evening.
Well, where I'm going to take us is I'm going to take us into the battle. I'm going to explain where we are, who we're talking about, what happens, and a little bit of the myth and the magic around why this is an important battle. And I know Darren, who I think is in the sidebar tonight, mentioned earlier today that he wanted to see some war artists, and I have peppered tonight's hour or so, there he is, with a couple of pictures, because the Canadians sent war artists over to Italy and they did some great work, and this happens to be one of my favorites. So this is Captain Lauren P. Harris, and we're going to see some of his art through this evening as well. One of the things I would say is that absolutely, Woody, you've got the right slide there. This is a battle that if you want to find out more about it, there is a huge amount that's been written, and there's also a lot of great video footage, because the Canadian Broadcasting Company was there. They were in the thick of it, and they were capturing some of the finest footage. And tonight we're going to try and do the whole of Ortona in one session. We could spend a week on this and not get into the detail, but there is so much footage out there. No matter what you're interested in, you will find a snippet of Ortona footage that really ticks the boxes for you. Whether it's the weapons, whether it's the clothing, whether it's doctrine, there's a lot of footage out there. And also, After the Battle has got a whole magazine dedicated to it. So.
Yeah, good magazine. And there's a link below, folks, to the Mark Zelke book, which is a good place to start. Mark, amazing writer about the Canadians in World War II and indeed World War I. And a great writer. His wife, I think, is a thriller writer. So she peps up some of his language to give it that kind of page-turning quality. And I just think he's a good writer. I know him a little bit, and it's a great place to start. Lots more as well as that, but that's a good book to start if you would want to get into this battle.
That's the Bible. That really is the Bible for Ortona.
Yeah, I mean, he's always a good place to start. So so art, maps, books, what's not to like, to quote James and Al there. So I'll hand over to you and let you guide me through tonight's show.
Yeah, do you want to start with? Should we do an overview of where we are? The next one, Woody, has got. That's it. We are in Italy. Let me think. What has happened so far? So by the middle of 1943, the Germans have been removed from Africa. They're doing almost like a fighting retreat. The Italians themselves, the Italian Expeditionary Corps, have helped to take the Ukraine. But by the time we get to September, we've got the 3rd of September, the armistice has been signed. The 9th, the Allies have landed in Salerno. Somebody's going to pick me up when I get one of these details wrong. I know they are. By the time we get to the end of September, we've gone up as far as Foggia. 1st of October, Naples. We are making progress up the peninsula. The Allies are making progress up the peninsula, and we've got two aims, really. Politically, we want to break through Hitler's defensive lines and take back Italy. Okay, because Hitler sees Italy as a springboard to the Balkans for the resources that are there. But from a military perspective, we want to divert all the attention we can away from Normandy. We are already preparing for Normandy. We want to really keep about 18, 20, 22 divisions pinned down as far away as possible. And why not Italy? We know that we can make the most of chaos and confusion. The Italians have decided roughly what they want to do. It's a divided country anyway. We're not talking about a cohesive civilian population. It's there for the taking. So that's what we do. The Allies cross from Sicily and start working their way up.
Yeah.
So Hitler at this point has not quite decided, sort of October, November, he's not quite decided what he wants to do. He's got Rommel telling him, hang on to the north. He's got Albert Kesselring saying, you've got to keep the whole of Italy. What he does know is that he's put time, effort and money and resources and 3.5 million men behind the construction of the defensive lines in Italy. So Organisation Top, they have built literally lines across the country. So you've got on the map there, you've got the garter, thigh high, that's the Gothic line. And then underneath the knee, that's where we are. That is the Gustav line. And the two yellow dots on that map, the one to the south is Cassino, and the one to the north is Ortona. That's the one there. So that's where we are. And if we jump to the next one, Woody, you can see that Ortona is right on the coast. Okay, it's a deep port, and from Montgomery's perspective, that's good news. Going into the winter, he would like to see this as somewhere to hole up. It is as simple as that. He can look at a big map and go, that'll do me. I know where the defensive lines are. And what's more, if I can take Ortona and then scooch up the coast and hang a left, Pescara, I can come in over the top of Rome and maybe get there before Mr. Clark. That's his plan. Okay. So the Allies, I mean, they've traveled how far? 750 kilometers in about 60 days. It's not been easy. It's been a cold winter. And they haven't exactly sort of trekked north without encountering some defensive positions. So shall we say? So they're not. They've had a hard time by the time they get to Ortona. But some of the Canadians have been having a walking war to this point, as in they've trained in England, they've come across, they've seen some action, but not a lot of it in the middle of Sicily. And they've come across the mainland, and they've literally trekked up following the Allies, trekked up the middle following the Allies. Okay. So when we think about where we are, what do we know? What do the Canadians know? What do the Allies know? They know that Ortona is a decent place to hole up for the winter. They know that it's a medieval town. They know it's on a cliff. And strangely enough, all the way up the peninsula this far, they have also known where the Germans have been and roughly what their positions have had in terms of defences, because all the telephone lines were left in place. And we know this because the Canadian Broadcasting Company made good use of them and couldn't get over the fact that the Allies were able to see in advance what was coming up. The other side of the Gustav line, it wasn't quite as clever as that. The Germans worked out they needed to cut the lines after that point. But as they're working their way up to Ortona, they know the geography, they know what they're going to come up against. Okay, so one of the things that is worth saying at this point is that with Clark and the Americans going up the left-hand side, up the west coast, and the Brits coming up the east coast. I mean, we do this. I do this far too often. I talk about, you know, the Brits and the Germans, but was it 27 nationalities comprise the Allied forces?
Yeah.
There's an awful lot there. Today we're going to talk just about Canadians. I could mention the Indians, I could mention the New Zealanders, but we're going to really hunker down on the Canadians, because what Montgomery does is he wants to alleviate I think it's the 78th Infantry, who are absolutely shattered by this point. And so he says to the Canadians, here we are, Ortona's over there, can you please go and take that? It's as simple as that, okay? Or at least it should be. Because while they do know where they're going and they know what they're going to see when they get there, they don't know much about the town itself, okay? And there's a reason for that. Between 1863 and 1937, the Italians were still mapping. They were still creating maps, okay? So if you jump to the next one, Woody, we've what we know is that the Allies were picking up maps in Italy to use to understand the lie of the land. And this is really important when it comes to Ortona. And the mapping they were using, it was incomplete. It was wrong. No two maps were the same. You could look at maps in the north, maps in the south, and they were just completely different. The symbols on them, they weren't standardized yet. And they were so bad that when the equivalent of the American Mapping Service, as it was then, and the Brits worked on creating mapping in the field, they said this is so bad that as long as we can apply the British military grid system on top to about 50 meters either way of it being right, that will have to do. We have not got enough time, energy, resources here to actually get accurate maps. That's going to change in 1944, but at this point in time, Italy's mapping is so bad they've got to go with what they got. So what they do have are, and jump to the next one, is they have all kinds of mapping that will show them roughly what the geography around Ortona is like. Okay, so there are some town maps on the left there, that middle one, which will show them built up areas, yeah. And let's say from the outset that the Germans haven't got it any better either. If you look at a Truppenkarte, if you look at their surveying techniques, I mean, they had captured all the surveying equipment and what mapping there was that was in Florence already, and they were using it but it was incomplete. Italy had not got its act together in terms of geospatial technology, topography, surveying, or anything. So everybody was on the back foot when it came to understanding what lay ahead. And maps being printed in the field, I mean, we could do a whole session on that, Woody, if you wanted to.
Yeah. Well, next time. Yeah.
So the Allies have got some mapping. They are also sending scouts ahead. They're working with the Italians to understand what the lie of the land is. And as far as they know, can you jump back for me, Woody, to where that yellow line is? As far as they know, that's the one. They can see on a map that there's some kind of maybe river there, bit of a dip. That is a massive gully, okay? And they are very, very underprepared for this by the time they get there, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk us through. Well, actually, let's talk about who we've got here first, okay? We have the Canadians. Let's talk about the Germans. Who's in the town? What we know is that coming up to Ortona, the Canadians, the Brits, are all aware that they're running into Fallschirmjäger, they're running into Panzer Grenadiers, they are running into troops that are experienced, and they have an idea who they're going to come up against in the middle of Ortona already. What Montgomery has done is split up and said, look, 1st Canadian, if you're going to go and do this, and this is, I'm going to talk us through. Well, actually, let's talk about the Germans. Who's in the town? What we know is that coming up to Ortona, the Canadians, the Brits, are all aware that they're running into Fallschirmjäger, they're running into Panzer Grenadiers, they are running into troops that are experienced, and they have an idea who they're going to come up against in the middle of Ortona already. What Montgomery has done is split up and said, look, 1st Canadian, if you're going to go and do this, and this is The nose completely gone. His nose completely gone. It'll come back in a second. Chris Vokes, there you go. Christopher Vokes.
It was coming to me as well then, because I put his name down in a day. But yeah, it's
So Chris Vokes is the man in charge. He becomes Major General Chris Vokes, and under him you've got Bert Hoffmeister. And although if you jump forward 3 or 4, Woody, we've got I could go through the next one. Go on.
Next one.
Next one, we'll jump backwards and forwards a bit. It'll be fun. Yeah. Don't worry about it. It's because I'm talking too far ahead. Don't worry. We could go through all 9 regiments that are there, but the ones that we're going to focus on tonight for time are the Loyal Edmontons, the Seaforth Highlanders, and the Three Rivers Tank Regiment. Okay, and this is the 2nd Brigade. Okay, so the 1st and the 3rd, they are just going to go up and round the town eventually, and the 2nd Brigade is going to go into the town and sort it out. Okay, but we've got to get to the town first. All right, so let me see. Yeah. Just to the south there, what they've got to do is they've crossed the Sangro, and they've got to cross the Moro River, and they've got to cross a gully, and they've got to get to the edge of town before they can work out what they can do. Okay, so the landscape itself is not conducive to mechanized infantry at all. It's not. This is mountainous. It is wet beyond belief. This has been the wettest winter for a long time.
And was going to get worse as well, wasn't it? We hadn't even hit the peak yet, had we?
Completely. Okay. So progress has been really slow, to the point where Montgomery has actually had a real go at Chris Vokes and said, why the hell aren't you getting on with it? I want you to go and sort out Ortona so that I can hold up there for the winter. And Vokes turns around and says, he actually sends the message back. If you want to come up here and show me how to do it any better yourself, you're welcome to, because what's keeping me from making progress at the minute is the mud. And there's just no way I can make progress. However, by the time that they've gone across the Sangro, they get to the Moro, it is raining so badly that the river has come up by 8 feet, 7.5, 8 feet. Okay. So the Canadians have got to get across this river, and it takes them, I think, 4 or 5 days to get across there. And the reason it does is literally the terrain. They cannot get down and in and up across a river that's swollen without engaging the wrath of the Panzer Grenadiers. Okay, and Hitler turns around and gives them all commendations for the way they comport themselves over this week in December. But they do get across the Moro. The Germans retreat. And they do then go across the gully. And I know I can already see in the sidebar that some people here tonight know this battle really well. Yes, we've got Cider Crossroads and Casabaradi. And we could spend a week doing this, and we've only got an hour or so. So please bear with me if I jump some of these details in coming up to Ortona.
It's those Canadians, that hardcore little Canadian following I've got, who I'm sure should be presenting these shows themselves. They know their stuff, this lot. Yeah,
I know, and it's really, really daunting, because you guys know we could talk about the Moro forever. We could talk about the gully forever. We could talk about the difference between a creeping barrage and a lifting barrage, and the fact that Morning Glory, 2 creeping barrages to get across the gully. Some people jump in and tell me I'm wrong. One called Morning Glory, one called Orange Blossom. Morning Glory goes okay, and Orange Blossom's a complete nightmare because of the mapping. Okay, mapping so bad that Orange Blossom turns, I mean, let's just say the Canadian forces were depleted unnecessarily. However, we've got to the edge of Ortona. Okay, now, Woody, if you want to have a look, just flick through slowly. Yeah, keep going, and we can have a look at some of these pictures. Yeah, those 2 there, coming up to the edge of Ortona. Yeah. That Captain Lauren
That's the
Phillips
same view, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think this is interesting, because one of the things about this battle is the way it is portrayed, not only in Mark's book, but by the Canadian Broadcasting Company and by the artists who are sent to document it. It is a propaganda battle. Let's never forget that this is a propaganda battle, and we'll understand why much later on. But that is absolute the view across to Ortona. They can see what they're coming up against. They can see it's a medieval clifftop town. They can see that C Company and Seaforth Highlanders there. They can see what's ahead of them.
But I would like to make the point that if they can see in, it means the people in can also see out, because vision works both ways.
Absolutely. And this is the real problem, is that even though progress is being made, everybody knows what the other person should be doing. So Montgomery makes predictions about what the Germans are going to do. Doctrine says that the Germans, if they are defeated, they'll retreat to the next highest ground or the next best defensive position. They are fighting. It's a fighter retreat, and it's a very good one. They've got great defenses in place. And the Allies know that whatever they do to move forward, they can predict this. Okay, they have been really reassured by the fact that they know how war is now being fought. They've been at it for 3 or 4 years. So the Canadians, having done what they've done and crossed the Moro and the Gully, they get to the edge of town. And by the time, if you jump forward a couple now, Woody, past the artists, we're going to have a look at the first map, I think. That's Hofmeister on, I beg your pardon, that's Chris Vokes on the left there. There's a funny chap in a beret in the middle, a couple of other reprobates there as well. Extra points if anybody knows who those chaps are. Let's see. I've probably got a list of them somewhere. Harry Crerar, Brian Horrocks. Yeah, Horrocks is there.
Horrocks is there, yeah.
Daniel Bryan, Bruce Matthews. That's quite a picture, that is, for all kinds of reasons. The picture afterwards as well will show this is a picture of a couple of Germans that were picked up on the way into Ortona, and I like this picture because it starts to show us the differences. The Fallschirmjäger are better equipped than we are. Okay, wait for the sidebar to go nuts. Oh no, they won't. I think they are better equipped. Their clothing was better, and certainly coming into the town, picking Germans up en route, they started to realise that the intelligence they'd been given was absolutely right, and they were coming up against Fallschirmjäger. They were coming up against elite, experienced troops. And from the outset, let's be sure here, even if they'd been at Stalingrad, there were also 17-year-olds here, 16 and 17-year-olds who were inexperienced. But the majority of the troops they were going to come up against in this town, experienced.
Yeah, and this I would add my point. This is the era 43 when the Fallschirmjäger are still generally pretty good. By 44, you start getting the Luftwaffe troops joining them up, lots of people without adequate training. But in 43, the Fallschirmjäger kind of at their peak, I would argue. And it sort of has a gradual decline after that. There are still some very good units around, but 43, I would think, is their kind of their happy period.
Yeah, Heidrich as well. He's got doctrine sorted out. He knows how these guys should operate, and they are trained troops. They're no longer novices at this point in time. So we're now coming up to the end of December. It's 20th of December. We're going to jump forward to that first map, Woody, and we're going to be on the edge of town. Okay. The Canadians, Chris Vokes has sent the 1st and 3rd Brigades up the west of the town. There you go, perfect. And what he's done is he sent Bert Hofmeister forward. Oh, magic. Absolutely fantastic. I didn't know you could do that. Great.
Yeah, we can do all sorts of things here.
That's brilliant. Okay, so he has sent Hoffy forward with the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, the Eddies, and the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada, and they are supported by the Three Rivers Tank Regiment. Okay, and when they get to the edge of town, they send scouts forward, and they make a quick recce. And what they find out is, because they've seen some mapping, they've got an idea this is a medieval town, but what they find is there are 3 massive squares in Ortona. You've got Piazza del Vittorio in the south, in the newer part of the town. You've got Piazza Municipale at the junction of the old and new town. That's it, just in the middle there. And you've got Piazza San Tommaso right in the middle of the old town, which is a few meters away from that's it, perfect, away from the castle. And then to the north of the town, you've got a railway tunnel. Okay, and guess what is hiding up in the railway tunnel? The Germans. Okay, so it really is. They know that they want to take this town from south to north. They want to clear it. They want to push the Germans through and back, because it stands to reason. What the Germans are going to do is, once they're being cleared, they are going to retreat to the high ground. That is what they're going to do. Okay. Unfortunately, what the scouts report back is that not only have the Germans not decided to hide, they are still there. They are well dug in, and they have had time to, shall we say, make preparations. Okay. What the Germans have done in Ortona, medieval town, tight buildings, is they have blown up buildings. They have created rubble piles. They have infested those piles of rubble with anti-tank and anti-personnel mines. They have blocked the side streets. And when I say rubble, that picture is a good example. This is the kind of rubber you can't take a tank over. You know, we've all seen the tanks down at Bollington doing great things coming up over it. You cannot take a tank down an alley that's 5 foot wide. You can't take a tank over a 16, 20 meter high rubble pile that is a demolished building. It's just not going to happen. Okay. And the other thing is that I know we've got some Canadians in tonight, but we have a town in Britain called Milton Keynes. The other thing that's great about a lot of medieval towns in Italy is they have a horizontal and vertical crossroad system all the way through the town. So you always know where you are. You can go over and you can go up. And what the Germans have done is they have absolutely loaded this town with sniper positions at every crossroads. Everywhere they know that they want to funnel these Canadians through the town, they have set up a position just to take them out. It is absolutely beautiful.
I was reading in my prep today. I forget what I was reading now, but it was, someone described it as like an experiment by gods putting humans into one of those labyrinths you put rats in a laboratory.
Yeah.
You know, blocking them through and observing where they're going to go and dead ends and trapping them and seeing what they're going to react. It was an interesting way of describing this battle, but I found that this afternoon.
Yeah, it is a really good way. And I think that it's a clever way of describing it for that same reason again, which is predictability. The Canadians have predicted what the Germans are going to do. This is a huge surprise to them. They are not prepped for urban conflict. Okay.
I was just going to make that point that the Allied army is generally not well trained in urban combat. I'm a Normandy guy. I remember Neil Barber telling me the commandos had been trained for urban combat because they're a small force and they could take them to what we would call today Fibua courses, but back then, whatever it was called there. But you couldn't put entire infantry divisions through urban warfare courses because where would you do it? How would you possibly put all those divisions in UK through urban warfare? So they had to kind of rely on, as we know, the Salisbury Plains and the Thetford Forests and those kind of places. So apart from some specialist forces, the Germans must have known that we are not good at urban fighting.
Well, and they have described us as fighting on the village green. We laugh now at Dad's army. We have trained troops to fight on the village green. We have not trained for urban conflict. Now, it doesn't mean we have ignored the concept of urban conflict, as we shall see. But certainly the Eddies and the Seaforth Islanders, they've got to start thinking on their feet. And I should mention as well that we've got regiments 3 and 4 of the Fallschirmjägers, and for the Loyal Edmontons we've got Major Jim Stone, and for the Seaforth Highlanders we've got a guy called John McLean, Lieutenant John McLean. Okay, and if you know the Die Hard movie, it's not that John McClane, but I'm sure that's where the name. He's a really animated guy who always thinking on his feet. So it's the 20th of December, and the initial move into town is across open ground. It's a bit chaotic. They take what is a big church for the area called Santa Maria Costantinopoli, and it's really chaotic fighting, and they get the impression that these young, experienced powers they're coming up against are running back into the town quite quickly, and they realise by the end of the 20th why they're running back into the town, because they know what's there and they know what's coming. They're not worried. What they want to do is lure the Canadians in. Okay, so big squares in Ortona. What the Canadians know they've got to do is clear the roads, get to the squares, have a bit of a wingding and get out the other side. That's the plan. What they realise is they can't take mechanized armour in. And not only that, if you're fighting in a built-up area, how do you call in a mortar? You can't do it. So it's got to be hand-to-hand combat from here on, and they know this. Okay. So if we jump forward to the 21st, Woody, which is I think it's just the next one.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. On the morning of the 21st, it's not a quiet night. There's already, from the 20th onwards, there's not a quiet moment for the next week or so. But as they wake up on the 21st, Hofmeister has a look and he realizes that the cathedral in Cathedral Santa Massa is a great observation point. You can see right across the town, and he orders the Three Rivers Tank Regiment to get rid of that. And this is one of the first myths of Ortona, is that the Germans knocked out the cathedral. No, they didn't. There is footage that is now around of Hofmeister saying, look, we're gonna go into this. I've got to do everything I can to protect my troops from observation posts, from snipers. So let's get rid of a cathedral. Okay. And we'll see a picture later on where Charles Comfort, one of the Canadian war artists, did this amazing picture of the cathedral, of the cupola that's shattered in two. So Jim Stone, who is the guy taking for the Eddies, supported by the Three Rivers tank there. And I should say that the red is the Lloyd Edmonton's. The blue is the tanks are going to go down as they can get clear. Okay, that's it. And the Seaforths, they're going to do a flank up the left-hand side to try and, they're going to cut across and go up there. That's it. Perfect. And the idea is just to go up as many streets as they can all together and clear what they can as best they can. They know it's going to be tough now. All right. In the town itself, I mean, this town has about 9,500 people living it at best, and there are probably about 1,200 people still in the town at this point. It's not a pretty fight at all. On the 21st, the Lloyd Edmonton D Company goes straight in, tries to do what it can, completely cut to pieces. 60 men reduced to 17 in the space of about 20 minutes. Despite their losses, the survivors did gain ground. And by the 21st, as you can see, I mean, the whole town only takes about 10 minutes to walk across on a good day. They've made some ground, all right? They've realized that the Germans are playing dirty. And I know that in war, they say that all is fair in love and war, but this is dirty, dirty fighting. It's not just rooftop positions. It's not just snipers. As they move forward, and if you jump to the next one, Woody, let's have a look at some of the pictures. What you can, this is a before and after. This is Corso Vittorio Emanuele. This is the biggest run through the town, okay? And you can see that those windows there are ideal for sniper positions. This is the far end. This is one of the only places where there isn't a massive pile of rubble. And the idea is they want the troops to, they'd love the Canadians to just go straight down there. Of course, the Canadians don't. What the Canadians do instead on the next one, Woody, is the Canadians work their way through the side streets. And that one to the right there, having been down there, that alley is no more than about 6 feet wide, okay? And the one on the left, those rubble piles are now booby-trapped with telemines, the big old anti-tank mines, with the pronged, the personnel mines. They have put wires across. It is just a nightmare making any progress, okay? And if you have a look at the next couple of pictures as well, Woody, you'll see that it is corner to corner fighting. It is breaking through walls. The guys are having to make progress inch by inch, meter by meter. It is not going to be fast fighting at all. So, yeah, this is one of D Company again. He's being shot at, and these photographs have been taken by by a guy called Matthew Holton and Pete Stursberg. They are there to record what's going on, and they are there to record not a sanitized view of what's going on, but they are to record to capture as much as possible of action, and they're about to see a lot of it. 21st, everybody moves forward as far as they can. They probably make about 250, 260 meters progress. By the time we get to the morning of the 22nd, they have already encountered a lot of civilians. They've already started pulling civilians from the rubble. They've started handing children from one to the other, back out, down through the streets to try and get rid of them. They've come across, there's a great story about one of the guys, one of the Eddies, going around a corner expecting to, he's checking to see what's happening. And he goes round the corner and finds 3 women washing their clothes. And he reports afterwards in a letter back home, he says they weren't being brave, they were just being stupid. The town was full of stupid people, but the town was still full of people. There's another story about the Eddies as they moved forward. The tanks that could move down these streets were being used as mobile pillboxes almost, and stretcher bearers. And there's a story about one of the Shermans unfortunately ran over a woman and had to keep running over her body backwards and forwards. It went backwards and forwards. This has started to become a really difficult battle to fight in. It's not just firing at each other. It's started to become hand-to-hand bloody combat. Okay. Captain Sid Thomas of the Seaforth, he went into one house and he went in for about 20 minutes, and he said the woman there made him a drink, and she sort of waved him on his way and made him understand that she had done the same thing for a German a couple of hours earlier. And we know this because there are a couple of accounts of, there are some good interviews from some of the paras, and there are also unit diaries, and there are a lot of letters around, as I'll show you later on, from the guys who have stayed in touch with Ortona. The Canadians have really stayed in touch with Ortona, and there are always visits going backwards and forwards. But I'm digressing, doing a real Guy Walters there, sorry. So we're going to get to the 22nd, okay? And the 22nd is really the day that the guys move into the middle of the medieval town. That's the bit in the centre. Yep. Perfect, Woody. That's it. So they've gone from Santa Maria. That's where their base is. And they've moved up. Yep. Moved up through via Costantinopoli, through Piazza Vittorio. That's where the Seaforths are now based. And you've got the blue lines. Those are the tanks managing to come through. And as they get to this really tight medieval part of the town, they realise that not only have the streets been booby-trapped, but the houses have been booby-trapped as well. Okay, so you've got snipers at the windows and on the roofs, and the houses have been booby-trapped. And when I say booby-trapped, I mean you've got things like there's a lovely interview of a guy who one of the Seaforths, he says that a friend of his pointed out a Fallschirmjäger dagger in a flower pot on the windowsill, said, "Oh, I'll have that for a souvenir." And he said, "No, you won't. Just stop there for a second." Nudged it out of the window with his rifle, and it was attached to a grenade. The other thing that the paras admitted doing was wiring all the toilets that they came across. All the functioning toilets they came across on one side of the street, they wired them, because they knew that what the Canadians would love to do in the middle of a battle is, oh my goodness, do you know what? I'd really like to use a toilet for a change. And they did. They wired them up to explode. So what you've got here is now we're in the middle of a medieval town. When you're not climbing over rubble, you are choking from dust. You've got buildings still falling down around you. You've got your own troops blowing up buildings still. You've got tanks moving forward, 6-pounders, 17-pounders moving forward to try and blow rubble out of the way so your tanks can move forward. You've got the German snipers. You've got machine gun nests at each crossroads firing towards you. What you need is a way to move through this medieval part of the town without getting killed, okay?
And I'm just going to jump in here. You're talking about companies as part of battalions, but this isn't a company organized battle. This is not where companies are fighting with a company commander and radio communications, and they're going back and forth to their platoon sergeants and their support. This is going to be groups of 2s and 3s and 4s and 6s with almost acting independently, where you're going to be having to rely on lots of improvised junior leadership, because you're not going to be in contact with your sergeant or your lieutenant all the time. It's a free for all, and it's high stress, and there's snipers and booby traps. Everyone's on complete tenterhook stress all the time. Yeah. It's a nightmare.
And that is such a good point, Woody, because one of the reasons that this works for the Canadians is because the command structure is there. The command structure is in place to facilitate that kind of fighting. Chris Folks has chosen Hofmeister. He likes Hoffy. He says, there's no such thing as a born soldier, but if there was one, his name would probably be Bert Hofmeister. Hofmeister, he gives authority right down to platoon level, and he says, look, this is our objective. This is what we've got to do. Work it out for yourselves. You're not going to be able to communicate. You're not going to get... What we've got to do is move forward and clear Germans out, okay? So up to you. However you can do it, that's fine by me. And to that end, you've got guys really working off their own initiative. There was a chap, I'm just trying to remember his name, Edward Mabley, I think it was, when he was training in Britain. He got, I'll remember his name in a moment, but Ed Boyd, that was it, Captain Ed Boyd. He had been training a guy called Mabley, Howard Mabley, who was what you might call he was a peaceful Canadian farmer. He never signed up to be a soldier, really. And Boyd had tried to train him to run a gun and ended up sending him to just peel potatoes instead. And what he found was that Mabley had gone forward with a 6-pounder on his own and put 800 rounds through it in one day on the 22nd. Deaf at the end of it. But on his own initiative, he knew somebody had got to stand there and man that gun and keep it firing and keep it firing and keep it firing to blow rubble out of the way, to move it forward. Okay. Here in Britain, we have something called we used to have something called the Royal Tournament. The Royal Tournament, we used to take guns to pieces and put them back again, the big old cannon gun run. These guys were having to disassemble guns, and so were the Germans as well, put them in and out of buildings and heaving them up in through windowsills to try and make progress. Okay, this is not an easy way to move forward. So what happens is the Seaforths and the Eddies, they're making progress, and they decide that instead of trying to go down the streets, because if you go out into the streets, you're just going to die. They're going to go through the buildings. So they are going to do something that is now known as mouseholing. Okay. This is another myth. Mouseholing was not invented by the Canadians. And I know the Canadians get animated about it, but the Canadians did not invent mouseholing. Let's explain what mouseholing is. Mouseholing involves, if you jump forward a couple, we've got a great graphic that was the Canadian engineers, Woody.
There we go. Yep.
There he is. That's the one. Mouseholing involves blowing a hole in the side of a building. Anywhere you like, you can put a Sherman up against it. You can fire at it with a 6-pounder or a 17-pounder, as long as you can get in and still leave the building still to be standing. You go in on the ground floor. You clear whoever's there. You go up to the top floor. And then whether it's a beehive charge with plastic explosives, whether it's an anti-tank, whether it's one of those telemines, excuse me, you pack explosives against the wall and you go through the top of the next building, which is not where the Germans are expecting you to come in. It is much easier to lob a hand grenade down the stairs and clear top to down than it is to go up. And once you've cleared that, you then trot back up the stairs and you go through the next wall. And these medieval buildings, they are so tight together, you can just go from building to building to building to building, mouse holing, small hole at the bottom, up through and along. It takes time. And once the Germans work out what's going on, you end up clearing both sides of the street by only clearing one, because no German wants to be caught behind enemy lines. And what in effect you're doing as you're moving forward is you are gaining ground here, and you get to a point where you can look back and go, okay, don't need to worry about them there, because they're going to come forward as well. They do not want to be caught behind us. So Ortona is often referred to as the first urban battle. Yes, it probably was, but it was not the first instance of mouse holing. If you jump, there you go, it is. And this is the Home Guard instructions. So number 51, battlecraft patrolling. That's it. This was in print way before the Allies ever got to Italy. There it is, mouse holing. There is little, if any, surprise in mouse holing, but if properly carried out, it's very, very effective. And that's the description of how to do it. Now, the Canadians would have had access to this training material in Britain. They may not have used it per se. They would have had their own little training manuals. They would have had access to it. So there is always going to be some debate as to who invented it on the day. For my part, I think the Brits documented it first. I think the Canadians worked out that that was the answer. Post Ortona, it's been attributed to the Canadians as being the guys.
Yeah, they refined it possibly, and they best used it. Yeah, maybe. But I mean, I remember, because I've got that same Home Guard man. I've had that for years. I remember having a discussion with some Home Guard veterans this was in Essex, and they were taught that it only works on certain types of building or certain type of construction. You need that kind of solid stone, like I have here in Normandy and Bayeux, where some of the houses have stone floors at a first floor and second, so you can actually blow a hole through the stone. If it's kind of beams and plaster and stuff, it doesn't always work so well, because things you don't know how big a hole you're going to blow. But with stone, it's really, really effective. So to me, it looks very if you can apply it to the right conditions, it's a brilliant technique.
Yeah, that's right. And these guys, I mean, they didn't get much time to practice, but they packed it like a bee. They called it a beehive charge, and they could just put it up against the wall, and they knew which way it was going to go, and it was literally go through the hole in the wall. Very, very effective. So effective that by the time we got to the end of the 22nd, moving forward, there you go, 23rd, start making some real progress now. It's still not pretty. Casualty wise, I'll give you a complete casualty rundown at the end, but we are losing guys along the way. Snipers are still one of the biggest problems. You've got people running past each other, head down in the street. You've got Germans running one way, and you don't have time to worry about taking out the guy who's just run before you, because all you're worried about is, can I get across the street without losing my life? It's very, very close combat. The other thing to remember, and I think we've had a look. I'm conscious we're flicking past some of the art tonight, but although this is portrayed as being really the Mediterranean brick colours, on the day, December, the light, it was overcast, and with the dust, everybody looked the same. This was a grey battle. The smoke and the shit and the fog and the fumes. This was not an easy place to be fighting at all. Okay. So 23rd, we're moving forward. That's it. There you go. The C-Force are going down the left flank now. The Eddies are surging forward. Excuse me. And they go down. Three Rivers have gone down. Corso Vittorio Emanuele. And you've got to a big rubble pile, which gets taken out with a piet quite effectively. And then they move forward, and honest to God, we could spend a week talking about how they move forward. But they know they've got to clear. They know they've got to clear the Piazza Municipale, and they know they've got to clear the town hall square. And they've got to, if they can clear these squares, they are confident then that the Germans will retreat.
Remind me again, Merryn, from north to south. What's the size of Ortona? 400
yards.
Yeah.
It's not
several days. Yeah, you said earlier, 10 minutes to walk across it.
Yeah, and the other thing here is that although the guys have got so they're based down the bottom there at Santa Maria Constantinople, that's actually further out, respectively. The Germans are hiding, and they're based in the north in the railway tunnel, and both sides are cycling fresh troops in and out as much as they can. The Germans are actually using bicycles. Believe it or not, they know where they've set booby traps. They know how to get in and out, and they are sending youngsters in. Go and relieve him. They're doing sort of 6 to 8 hours on and off, and they're cycling troops. So they've got fresh men sitting in sniper positions. The Canadians, as much as possible, are working forward until they die. They are able to swap in and out, but not as much. By the time we get to Christmas Eve, the 24th, next day, Woody. Christmas Eve, everybody knows what day it is. Everybody's issued a man-sized issue of rum with tea in it. Tastes like the Moro River with a mud chaser, I think is the way Mark Zulka describes it. And they are confident. So the Edmonton War Diary shows that they are confident that things are going to change, and they are absolutely wrong. Because by this time, the Canadian Broadcasting Company has started getting word back. CBC has started sending word back, sending footage back of what is happening here. And they have started using the phrase Little Stalingrad, okay? They have started describing this as being a nightmare for the Germans. And word comes down to Heidrich, you have got to stay there and you have got to defend this to the end. There is no way you are letting this town go. Hitler sends word to Heidrich, you are not letting this town go. I don't care what happens. So on the 24th, what the Canadians see is actually a force coming forward, okay? It starts to become offensive. And although we are at war, although we've been working away urban conflict for 3 or 4 days, it starts to get destructive. And what I mean by that is no longer is it just about hand-to-hand combat, who's going forwards, who's going backwards. The Germans take out a building with 45, 46 Canadians in it. They know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're starting to play really nastily. Hofmeister calls up the engineers and said, I don't care what's going on. I want that building there. The hospital is just get rid of it. It's got Germans in it. I've asked this Italian woman. She's told me that's where they are. And he sends the guys forward and they're using Amatol in 4-gallon like drums and what charges they can. And they are about to blow the hospital when they realize that there are also a lot of young women and children in there. They do as much as they can to rescue as many people as possible. And effectively, they blow half the hospital to try and take out some of the Germans. It becomes a real tit-for-tat fight across the 24th. It's horrible. And about this time, somebody will pick me up if I'm wrong, it might be the 25th, the Germans bring down a building with a guy inside it. Gordon Curry Smith is his name. He's buried alive for 3 days. He's entombed for 3 days. They know he's there. They can hear him. It would have been a waste of time and resource to try and get him out. But when they do eventually get him out, he survives for a while. It's become a bit of a gamble for both sides as to what's going to happen now. It's Christmas. Everybody's fed up. Everybody's exhausted. The Hofmeister has asked them to take the tanks as far forward as they can, and that's it. Working their way through. They have got through to the squares. They are starting to. They're just getting to the point where they're starting to feel they might be making a difference, and they're working through to what they start calling Dead Horse Square. Do you know why it's still called Dead Horse Square, Woody?
No.
It's got a dead horse in it. That's how
I was going to say that. I thought that was too obvious. Yeah.
No, it is. It's called Dead Horse Square. And by the time we get to the 25th, they bring up a couple of tanks and they just sit tanks at the end of. Yeah, that's what Ortona looks like now. That's just moving through Ortona. Interesting in all the war art we see, and you can flick backwards and forwards across the pictures for a minute if you want, Woody. All the war art we see in Ortona. That's no people. There's another dead horse there. There are no people. This is a propaganda exercise, and the Charles Comfort, Major Charles Comfort there. That's a picture of a Sherman at San Leonardo di Ortona, just the other side of Ortona. No people in these pictures. These are pictures that are created. Those are the two guys creating them to give an impression of the Allies moving forward successfully. So even when and cleanly, absolutely. There's no blood, there's no guts. These are pictures that are showing destruction, yes, but they are showing that the Allies are moving forward cleanly through the town. They are making progress. It's a real shame, actually, because there were German war artists. The art that they created hasn't survived. I mean, that picture there is somebody will need to tell me. I've got a note here. Oh, it's Via Dolorosa. That's right. That's Via Dolorosa. So that's working down to San Tommaso the other way, and you can see the light coming in. Still no people in those pictures. The Italians are hiding in cellars, which, by the way, were full of wine, and that created a problem later on. But as you said, Woody, the Canadians are working forward under their own auspices, small platoon level, people making their own decisions. They are trusted to get on with it, and the Italians are welcoming them to some extent. They recognise through the dust that they are being liberated. So come the 25th, Christmas Day, it doesn't go quiet But a strange thing happens. It being Christmas, the troops being a little bit down, what the two quartermasters decide to do, I mean, they've been gathering as much fruit and meat as they can all the way up as they've been working up the peninsula. But what they decide to do on the 25th is have Christmas dinner. They decide to have Christmas dinner in the middle of Ortona, or in the middle of a battle. And this is a picture that was taken by, his name will come to me in a moment, Lieutenant Terry Rowe. That's it. Now, he took the actual picture, but there is also video footage of this, and we'll see some in a minute. We'll see video footage of this dinner taking place. And on the left there, I'm just going to read through what the Canadians had for dinner on Christmas Day. All the while there is still gunfire going on around them. A bottle of beer, nuts, oranges, chocolate, soup, pork apple sauce, cauliflower, vegetables, mashed potato, gravy, Christmas pudding and mince pies. Many men lost their lives because while they were walking back to Santa Maria Constantinople, they got drunk. Conversely, the Germans up in the railway tunnel, they too had a Christmas day, and they found a Christmas tree, a decorated Christmas tree much later in the tunnel. They were given sausages, potatoes, vegetables and bread. It's quite strange that in the middle of a war, in the middle of a battle, you've got something like happening. The officers served the men, and we know that some of this because I was very, very fortunate. And I don't know if he's watching tonight. David Fraser, honest to goodness, he was so kind and so generous to share some personal letters. It's the next slide, Woody, that describe the meal that people had. This is his grandfather. And there's some personal details in here, so I've just given you small snippets, but they described the meal in detail. Officers served the men, and it was a real respite. These guys, psychologically, they have been absolutely shattered. Nobody expected this kind of conflict. Nobody expected this kind of hand-to-hand fighting. The fighting doesn't stop on the 25th. It goes on, but they do get to at least sit and have a proper meal. And this is
also,
really
I'm being devil's advocate here, but it also, publishing photos of a Christmas dinner is also taking away a bit of the nastiness, the grubbiness, the loss of life, the destruction of property. It's sort of saying that the battle's not perhaps quite as vicious as it was in reality. It's sending a message. I mean, you said at the beginning, there's a propaganda element to this whole story that I'm sure you'll touch on later on, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking. A Christmas photo is sending. I can see it being very important of the troops participating in Christmas dinner, but the photos say something else entirely.
That's absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. It gives an impression. What we have to remember, I think, to some extent, is that for the Brits, who are, we're on the receiving end of V1s and V2s. For the French, for the Belgians, for the Germans themselves, German civilians. Let's not forget, not every German was a Nazi. For even the Spanish. In Europe, war is war. But if you are in America, it's like living on a different planet. Yes, there are families that are experiencing loss, but you can't put your hand to your ear on the Kent coast and hear what's going on. It is completely different. So the broadcasting companies are being relied on to politically find sway so that the Americans, the Canadians will actually back sending troops and sending resources and sending men to their death. And the only way to do that is to sanitize and, as it were, lure that sway in and say, look, yes, war is going on. We need support. We need to send our boys over there, and we're doing the right thing. And just the Americans are never going to do that if all they're going to see is, heads torn off and the blood and the gut. It's got to be sanitized to some extent. There is another reason why this is a propaganda battle. We're going to come to that in just a second. 25th, Christmas Day. Christmas dinner is had by all. There you go. 26th, 27th, 28th. This is the map for the 26th, 27th, 28th. What happens here is, in short, we manage to push the Germans to the point where we are making ground day after day, hour after hour. The Paras are falling back slowly. They are falling back slowly. The 26th is hard fighting. This is buildings, as I said, being brought down, one on top of the other. The Germans take out 30 or 40 of the Seaforth, and the Seaforth reciprocate. Everybody is trying very hard to move in the right direction. The Canadians are still trying to move north. 27th, absolutely same thing happens. And on the 27th, Heidrich gets a phone call where he's told, you can't retreat. You cannot retreat. You've got to stay there. On the 27th, Vaux comes forward and says to Hofmeister, do you want to retreat? And Hofmeister says, no, I'm here for the duration. Now, one question that I've been asked several times is, this was a coast. Why is there no support why is there no naval support? There is naval support, but you still can't send shells in when you've got everybody sitting on top of each other fighting in the middle of a town. It just can't be done. So the Germans are aware that naval support is there and things could get really nasty. But by the time we get to the 27th, the town is an absolute mess, complete carnage. It's been completely destroyed. Those Italians who are still there know that their homes, their life, everything is gone. It is just destruction. There are a couple of corsos that are standing. The medieval part of the town has done fairly well, but certainly the newer parts of the town, complete rubble fest, absolute rubble fest. Okay, so 27th, the fighting is going on. They're starting to collect the dead. Everybody goes to bed on the 27th. Morning of the 28th, Hofmeister gets the guys up and Jim Stone goes for no Germans. The Germans have disappeared. Morning of the 28th, the scouts go out and the Germans have absolutely disappeared. They have not even done a fighting retreat. The order has come down and they have just left the town. So then what we have is the Canadians not exactly celebrating, but at least getting some respite. And in short, for the next 3.5, 4 months, they sit there through a pretty bad winter and do what they can to help the Italian civilians repair a town. I know that 30 seconds doesn't do it justice, but again, that's another story in its own regard. By this point, Vaux has moved 1st and 3rd Brigades up the west flank, and again, scooping up those. It's just now a march down into Rome. But the battle for Ortona has been conducted for a couple of reasons. It wasn't just Montgomery wanted the town. It wasn't just he wanted the port. It wasn't just he wanted the winter hole up. It was also about, in terms of propaganda, they had some visitors. Montgomery knew that, if you go to the next slide, Woody, Montgomery knew that there were some visitors coming to this area. Russians. So at the beginning of this year, Stalingrad, okay, absolute nightmare. By the time we get to end of July, August, September, we've got the conference and Stalin has turned around and said, okay, all right, I know how things are going to go now, but I want you to open up a second front. I cannot do this all on my own. I cannot be the one who is constantly on the offensive here. I need some support. What are you going to do about it? The complete plans for Normandy aren't just shared around. You know, it's not, oh, well, can you hang on for a couple of months because we're gonna do D-Day in June next year. Stalin is intent. He says, look, you've got to do something in the south. You've got to pull the Germans away from the Eastern Front. There are only so many German troops, so many German forces. What can you do? So the agreement is to go into Italy, and the progress is not fast enough for Stalin. So he sends observers. Montgomery knows that he is sending observers. Montgomery looks at the map and says, Canadians, go and take Ortona so that Stalin's observers can see we're not hanging about. What Montgomery doesn't account for is crossing the Moro, crossing the gully, losing so many men on the way. What he doesn't account for is the fact that German doctrine should have meant a fighting retreat, whereas they decided to hunker down and booby trap and go for urban conflict. In short, Montgomery got away with this by the skin of his teeth. this could have been an absolute war changer if it had gone another way. If the Germans had hung on to Ortona, I dread to think what would have happened over the next 6 months or so. And part of the reason that the Canadian Broadcasting Company was pivotal here was because it called the battle Little Stalingrad. That got printed in the newspapers that Hitler was able to see and to read. Hitler, being stung so badly by what had happened in Stalingrad, literally picked up the phone and said, not twice. We're not going through that twice. You've got to stay in Ortona. So you have this perfect storm of Stalin sending observers to make sure that what was going to go on was going to be worth him being involved in, that Montgomery was actually doing what he said he was going to do and really sort some troops out and make sure that second front was working. Canadians, Montgomery, there's a difference in opinion about whether or not he actually liked the Canadians.
Does Montgomery like anybody, I think, is the big question.
I mean, there's in several places you will find mention the fact that, Ortona was pivotal, but Montgomery doesn't mention it in his memoirs. No, he doesn't. He never mentions Ortona in his memoirs. He does, however, single out the Canadians and say what a magnificent job they did in his, and it's not a memoir, it's his report of the Eighth Army's campaign in Italy. And he wrote a book on that, and he does single them out in there, and that book gets overlooked. But in short, what we've got in Ortona is the perfect storm where people are expecting there to be conflict. They want to see conflict. Conflict is being shown and reported in such a way that it all becomes a complete and utter mess.
And then it gets given a name that adds another whole level of weight to it.
That's right.
That just happened by circumstance. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean
as we're getting towards the end now, we had a couple of questions earlier on the sidebar there about could there have been an alternative in that could we have just bypassed it, not done it at all, sieged it out, let the Germans in there starve? Is there any other course of action? I mean, there's always another course of action, but are any of those actually worth considering?
Yes, there are. Montgomery, in fact, Vokes could have sent minimum number of forces into Ortona. He could have sent less than a brigade in. He could have said to Hofmeister, look, just send the bare minimum in, and actually first and third and maybe even the edit go up and round and come in from the north. They could. Because
the time it took in the town, that would have given time to go the mountainous route inland around it. I mean, they had 4, 5, 6, 7 days. Even if the terrain is really shit, you could move troops over that time.
Totally. They're trying to get to Highway 16, which literally goes out of the north of Ortona. It's a great road to go out on. They're trying to get to Highway 16 to cut up to Pescara and across. They don't actually need to go into Ortona unless they've got to demonstrate for Stalin's observers. And that is the purpose of that for me is the purpose of Ortona. There's a neat little battle, or what Montgomery and certainly Vokes, he's under instruction then, what they believe is going to be a clearing exercise because the Germans will do a fighting retreat. And it's just a complete and utter cluster bomb. And that's not what they were expecting. They could have done it a different way. I mean, Vokes,
but also we also need to accept the fact that once that battle begins on the outskirts of town, it all got much worse than they were anticipating very, very quickly. And had they known it was going to get that bad, they might have sort of. I keep thinking, because I'm a Normandy guy, of the Battle of Carenton for the 101st Airborne, because people say that to me, why didn't we just blow that town up and not even try and take it? So, well, we didn't know how many Germans there were in it until we started committing the 101st down the causeway into town. If we'd known how many were in it, yeah, sure, we could have called up the P-47s and blown it off. But once you're committed, once you're halfway in a battle, it's very difficult to disengage and do something else. So I think once you're up to December 21st, 22nd, even if you think, oh, maybe we should have done this, too late now. You've made your bed. You've got to lie in it.
Yeah, completely committed. And just take a step back for just a second. Chris Vokes is not the kind of guy to do innovation on the fly. He's not overly light. They called him the butcher. He's a by the book soldier. Okay, and he was actually quite good at devolving command and saying, look, this is the objective, you go and do it. And he's, from that perspective, he is a good soldier. At the start, I mean, when they were training, he was reasonably respected as they're working their way up through Italy. He was the guy who set up a brothel, or tried to set up a brothel for his own troops. And Montgomery sent a message directly to him saying, there will be no brothels in Italy. But he did. He sent his Batman out with a whole bunch of lira to find some girls and say, look, I'm losing guys along the way. Go and set up a brothel. He understood what it meant to be in a war. He was also very aware of his troops' behavior. When when an Italian girl came along and complained, in fact, there were two incidents. One, an Italian girl complained that she'd been raped by a Canadian soldier, and what actually turned out was that actually she and this lad had been having fun, and her mother had sent her down to say, "You got to come and complain." The second thing that happened was an Italian woman came, and Vokes had to deal with a complaint about being raped by two South Africans, and two dark-skinned South Africans. And this is in his memoirs. It turned out that one of the guys had a beard, and he said, actually what she was complaining about was that one of the guys had a beard and she didn't like it very much. He understood what his men wanted to do. They were there, they had to fight, they wanted to drink, they wanted to be fed. That, again, the inspiration for the Christmas dinner. If you can feed a man, if you can get him laid every so often, if you can make sure that his spirits are kept up, he will go to war for you. In that respect, Vokes was a good leader, and he instilled that in Hofmeister, and that went down as far as Jim Stone and John McClane. They did lead, and they were good. I believe they were good leaders. Vokes at the end of Ortona was regarded as a butcher. He was blamed for Ortona to some extent. During September, 69, 70 men killed, all ranks, across every member of the Canadian forces in Italy. In December, that went up to about 2,500 killed. In that month alone, 2,500 killed, and about 1,400 listed as either sick or suffering from neuropsychiatric disorders, as in the conflict had been so bad they had to be pulled out. They weren't physically maimed, but they were gone, completely shattered.
Which is very telling. Yeah.
Which is very telling. I mean, the impact and the effect of this battle in particular. There were so many lessons learned from this. Number one lesson being, don't do urban combat. Do everything you can to avoid it, because it's just going to be a complete...
I mean, it's a good time to ask Greg Way's question. Greg has written books about the Fallschirmjäger. So did the Allies use Ortona after the battle for any kind of urban warfare training, or at least look at it as to pick up some tips for how to do things later on? Ruins? Did they actually ever use it afterwards for practicing?
Yeah, both sides did. Both sides saw this as a lesson learned. Remember where we are. We're now 1943. That's actually not that long to go. But news of how this had gone went round like wildfire. And the idea of mouseholing was passed on elsewhere. This we're just going to fly through here now.
I'm just playing the video now because
this is a good way to finish off. Just zooming in here to Ortona, the lessons learned from this battle were incredible. This is walking through the main streets of Ortona, one of the modern alleys, or medieval alleys. You can see there just how narrow these streets are. This is CBC footage. Sherman's going in. That's at the south of the town. I mean, it was just dust everywhere. You couldn't see. A Panzergrenadier took this one out. You'll see it burst into flames in a moment. The guy, unfortunately, is killed. There you go. All the weaponry you'd expect to see. This is hand to hand, and yes, this is footage of the Germans as well. And this, for me, is really telling, because this is all CBC footage. I think there's only one shot that I could find in this footage that was posed. Everything else is actual footage of.
I mean, it looks like it's posed. It looks like it's from a sort of a warfare school.
Yeah,
I mean, but yeah, it is all real. Yeah.
This is all absolutely real. That I think is training footage, but that shot there is not. So the rubble is not. And if you have a scout round, this is coming into Christmas dinner now. If you have a scout round, there are some incredible Fallschirmjäger training videos on the internet. I'll send you a list as well of books and bits and pieces that you can share. This is pork and it's Christmas pudding, and it is a real live Christmas dinner. This, unfortunately, is the cemetery just to the south of the town now. It's one of the most peaceful cemeteries you can visit. The sea breeze that comes across there is incredible. Yeah, Italian civilians, just that. Coming through the wreckage, the rubble, this little boy, what has he been through? And this footage here, look, the old guy walking through that footage was taken in the first week of January. It's a real lesson learned at this battle for both sides. They use it and they pass on the information as much as possible. What do you do in terms of urban conflict? How do you handle yourselves? How do you move forward? What do you need to look out for apart from water systems being booby trapped? It's the culmination of the move up the peninsula. The guys then sit for 2 or 3 months. This is the overwintering for Montgomery, for the Brits, for the Canadians, for the Allied troops. The Germans know they're going to fall back now. Next up is going up towards the Gothic line. The writing is completely on the wall. But Ortona is a propaganda battle from start to finish. Montgomery needs to take Ortona, not because it's a port, not really because it's a winter holing up, but because Stalin has sent his observers and needs to see that progress is being made. That's the Battle of Ortona, start to finish. Well, there are so many books about Ortona. Please go and buy them all. They're great. Yeah,
and it's interesting as well because most of the books I've seen or read are written by Canadians, and that which means they're giving the Canadian point of view. It's not a battle that the British particularly write about because we weren't kind of there. So it's always interesting, I think. I'm sure the Canadians reading this or watching this will appreciate a British opinion of it because, as we've always talked about on these shows, it's a very nationalistic way of talking about these histories. And it's interesting to get kind of the British version of Dieppe compared to the American Canadian version of Dieppe and vice versa, Normandy and what have you. So it's been a fascinating discussion. Apparently, the bit of the clip of the Panther is in Cologne. Apparently, that little tiny bit of clip is Cologne.
I saw that.
But there you go. Whatever we can't. I make a mistake every show at least once, at least 3, 4, 7.
But Woody, I make mistakes all the time. That's part of the joy of being, an enthusiast historian. Is we are all learning. And I noted that Paul Reed there said. Ortona is not used for urban warfare training. No, the town itself wasn't, but the lessons experience, the lessons learned were passed back. Yeah, and
so I mean, this is obviously that you've lived there, you've been there. I mean, what is there anything still that hasn't been determined or decided about this battle? I mean, I'm thinking of things like Arnhem, where there are still debates. We could question some of the Canadian leadership here, but is there some big thing that is the bone of contention that people discuss, or is it and if so, what is it?
There are a couple of things, but they're high level. A lot of people still refer to this as the invention of mouseholing. It just isn't. Okay, and if you go to Mubar, the museum in the town, there's a lot more there about the impact on the civilians. It was not all glory. It was not all liberating Canadians. There were some naughty Canadians there as well who got very drunk and did some very silly things. But the horror of the Germans going through the town, they were equally as heinous in the way they treated the civilians. That's a story that's not told. But that, I think, is equal right the way across Italy. We talk about the Allies, we talk about the Axis forces, and we forget the Italians every single time. If you get me started on the Gothic lines and the partisans, the civilians there, all the time we talk about the Germans. The Italian story gets lost. I don't
think we have a natural sympathy towards Italians for whatever reason. It's like I'm planning my Italy week shows now, which we've got in May, and we're doing a show about the Italian Navy particularly because all of the Italian services get lumped into their very crap, and the Italian civilians get lumped into, well, they change sides and don't really care. And it's not that they're untrue, those statements. There's elements of truth about those statements. It's the fact there's a lot more complexity and nuance to it, and having sympathy towards civilians. And it's always the people at the bottom end, the poorest families in the poorest parts of town are always the ones who end up coming off the worst. And Ortona, I think, gets overlooked in that regard. As does Rome, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, very much so. Particularly up if you get Gothic Line, Giogo Pass, Futa Pass, Marzabotto, the massacres up there where you've got partisans, you've got Folgare, you've got a complete situation where you've got, if you put 10 men in a row, everyone can be fighting for a different reason for a different force.
Yeah.
Okay. Exactly. And brothers and cousins are on the other side going, there's that David, what's his name, meme where he goes, are we the baddies now?
David Mitchell, exactly.
David Mitchell, are we the baddies? And it's like that in Italy, and Italy itself at this point in time. I mean, when I lived there in the 1990s, you could still travel 15, 20 miles and have to learn another dialect. Okay, so the north, the industry, the south, the agriculture, and in the 1940s, it was a very, backward is not the right word, but it was a very segregated nation. Yeah. So the idea of being united in war was an anathema. It was completely anathema to them. I think the interesting one that I would like to explore more in Ortona is the cross use of weapons. Because in Ortona, I am convinced that you would have, I mean, this goes wherever you are, urban combat, but the ability to pick up your enemy's weapon and use it as well as he does was pivotal in Ortona, because you were walking into buildings and having to use what you found on the floor to make progress.
I found a still this afternoon of a Fallschirmjäger guy, and I think it's in Ortona, using a Bren gun.
Yeah,
not only is it you improvising someone else's equipment, it's also misleading. You know, when you were talking about the working only having to clear one side of the street, if you're then an Allied soldier and you hear a Bren gun the other side of the street, you're going to naturally assume that's one of your mates moving up there, but it might be the Germans. So there's an element of trickery as well that you can. It's like throwing your voice, isn't it? Using the wrong weapon is sending a message by sound that there's someone there who isn't there.
Yeah, and I don't know if Nick's watching, or but I know when he's on Twitter, he talks a lot about the sound of a German machine gun being completely different. You imagine what happens if you hear your guns. You've just said it. If you hear your guns here, you know where you are. Well, if you've got a German picking them up and going, well, I'll use these guns instead, that puts completely different perspective on it. The other controversy that once you find out it isn't really a controversy is who knocked down the cathedral. A lot of the books say, well, the Germans did that. That was terrible. No, Hofmeister ordered it, and there's footage of him saying...
It's got a German name, though, isn't it? So by default, we can kind of blame it on the Germans.
Well, interesting you say that, because when some of the veterans went over in 2008, 2009, there's footage of a guy who was walking around the cemetery going, yeah, immigrants, Canada, this guy here, Willie Hess, he was a Canadian. It was really difficult. There were a lot of immigrant families, Canadian immigrant families with German names, and it has been written about. I think Pete Sturberger, one of the CBC guys, mentions it. He says, it was like shooting at my cousin, are the reports from the guys in the field saying, you know, my surname is Hess, my surname is Schmidt. Really difficult battle.
Well, you get that all the Canadian cemeteries in Europe. You see the Polish names and the Dutch names, the German names and the Scots names and the Welsh names and everything. Just one thing I want to address. Soren there said, where is it gone? That even after Ortona, Monty, or the discussion of Caen, so we haven't learned to less. I would argue we had, because Caen, although yes, it was rubble, we didn't fight in the middle of Caen. I mean, we kind of did. When Caen was liberated on July 7th, 8th, and 9th, Caen is a much bigger city than Ortona. I mean, it's quarter of a million population, but we destroyed it. Montgomery's argument would be to avoid having that urban warfare. The fighting for Caen was before Caen and after Caen, not so much in the town itself or the city itself, which was relatively straightforward. I mean, I did shows on the liberation of Caen last year, and the actually walking into Caen the last day, relatively straightforward compared to what had been happening in Operation Charmwood before. So I would argue actually that there had been lessons learned about not getting caught in a town and too much urban warfare. So, I mean, that's not defending or not defending the bombing of Caen. That's a separate subject, the policy of the RAF bombing and the destruction. But we certainly in Normandy did not find ourselves in urban warfare really in that same way. People will say, yes, there are examples of urban. Cherbourg, I suppose, possibly Mortain, maybe Saint-Lô, but no, I don't fighting for Saint-Lô was before Saint-Lô, really.
This is the weird and the wonderful and the slightly bizarre thing about war is that when we start talking about a campaign or a battle, there's no such thing as normal. There's no such thing as standard. And for Ortona specifically, when we start talking about this was the first urban. We'd have Stalingrad. This is why they called it Little Stalingrad. There are always instances where you can point, you can say, but they did this here, but they did that there. And I think that for anybody who goes to Ortona, you will see on the walls the marks and the evidence of the fighting that took place. That in itself is worth the trip there to go and have a look at, because as the first urban conflict, there's no way around it. It completely trashed the place.
Absolutely. Well, that's a typical. Everyone likes to talk about the first, the biggest, the earliest, the loudest, the shortest. That's a way of drawing attention to anything, isn't it? There's that. I was on for Twitter today. There's that debate about the That's All brother, the C-47 that claims on its website was the lead aircraft into Normandy because it was the lead of the main formation, but there were pathfinders before. But that somehow the tag of being first makes something sexy, doesn't it? That's the first time, like Mouseholing, the first time Mouseholing. What is ever the first of something is always hard to debate and open to opinion. But anyway, I think we ought to bring things to a halt because otherwise we'll go down numerous rabbit holes, which will be fun, but things to do. So it has been a pleasure listening to you, Merryn, and I know people watching have enjoyed it. The Canadians appreciated it. I think there's lots more angles we could delve into in future shows about these discussions, captured weaponry. But from the time being, I think we'll leave it at that. But yeah, great. So in terms of what we've got coming up, folks, don't forget we're right in the middle of busy shows. The Sobibor show from earlier today was postponed because of issues Hannah Wilson had, but it's going to be back on again the 29th. Tomorrow we're going into France with the SOE with Kate Vigurs. That's will be at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Then there are lots of shows coming up. Saturday we got Warbirds and we've got the one about the Halifax bomber. Jane is watching now. So lots of things coming up. I can't keep them all in my head, but we'll just keep an eye on the schedules, keep an eye on YouTube, and we'll see you there. But anyway, thanks, Merryn, for joining us. As usual, there's links in the description below. You can find Merryn's site as a writer, her website, her social media links. There's a link to Mark Zelke's book about Ortona. And other than that, I will see you all tomorrow for the SOE. So thanks for watching, everybody. And I'm going to go and watch the last 5 minutes of Ipswich losing the football tonight. I think they're losing. I guess they're losing. So thanks, everybody, for watching. I'll see you all tomorrow.